Story 1. Not being allowed to take off blazers and jumpers in summer unless it was officially sanctioned. Otherwise, you got detention. Students regularly passed out in the heat. Drinking water in class required permission, and going to the toilet was not allowed without consent. It is an all-girls school, so considerations for menstruation were important. Story 2. Not a crazy rule, but crazy application of an existing rule. The rule says no weapons and defines weapons. The list includes chain necklaces, but only with links of a certain size. I had a ball chain necklace that did not exceed the size limitation. I was warned about it twice, and I explained and pointed out the rule. Nonetheless, I was sent to the dean. The dean then stated that the rule includes items that could be used as weapons. It did not say any item that is not listed but is being used as a weapon. I pointed out that all 3 times I was stopped by security, it was fastened around my neck and not being used as a weapon. The dean said, "But you could use it as a weapon." I replied, "Yes, but I could also stab someone in the eye with a pencil." That did not go over well, so my mother was called in. We discussed the rule. My mother asked, "Was he using it as a weapon?" The dean restated, "No, but he could have used it as a weapon." Keep in mind, I had not had a private conversation with my mother at this point. Nonetheless, she calmly stared at the dean and said, "Yes, but he could stab someone with a pencil." Story 3. In my school, boys could not sit with girls. Teachers would give punishment to naughty students by forcing them to sit with girls, which was supposed to be something to be ashamed of. Story 4. No solid color t-shirts because they could signal gang affiliation. This was rural Georgia in the 1980s. Story 5. We had to have our hair back and out of our faces behind the ears. It was easy enough, but my curly, fuzzy hair was not neat enough, so I was sent to the office daily. I started braiding my hair into 2 braids, and after a few days, I was sent to the office because my hair was not secured with 1 hairband. I was told to do 1 braid. I did that, but it still was not neat enough because 1 braid cannot contain thick, frizzy hair. Another girl cut her hair short and was sitting in the office with me because apparently girls had to have their hair tied up with 1 hair tie, and hers was too short, which made it too messy. Story 6. All girls Catholic school. We had the stereotypical kneel down to see how long your skirt was game, but they made it worse by having you bend forward while kneeling to see if the skirt covered your backside. So imagine being a teenage girl in front of a male teacher on your hands and knees while they inspect you to make sure they cannot see your underwear. Someone with far richer and more legally advised parents than mine caught on, and it only occurred the first year I was there. But who thought that was a good idea? Story 7. Nobody in my high school was allowed to use the bathroom when the entire school was doing standardized testing. It didn't matter what the excuse was or how badly someone had to go. The answer was always a hard no. I actually got in-school suspension way back when I was in 9th grade because of it. I had to pee, asked my teacher if I could go, and she said no. I started outright begging her and told her I was going to pee myself if I couldn't go. Still no. So I told her I was just going to go anyway, walked out of the classroom, and headed to the bathroom. No regrets. Kids of all ages should be encouraged by their parents to do the same if they need to. If you have to go, then you have to go. Any teacher who can't accept that it's a normal bodily function and that it can't always be held is a teacher who isn't worth listening to. Story 8. We were not allowed to wear coats in class during winter because it looked sloppy. Meanwhile, the heating barely worked, and half the windows did not shut. Story 9. My bathroom anxiety began in school. I was in 3rd grade when I raised my hand and asked to use the bathroom. The teacher said no, and since I interrupted the lesson, I had to go to the board and do the next math problem. While standing at the board in front of the class, I wet my pants. I was so humiliated until one of my friends gave me a high five and said, "Way to teach her a lesson." I realized most of my classmates thought I did it on purpose to get back at the teacher. It became a bit of a legend in my grade, which helped me save face, but it still really affected my mental state around the bathroom. I started going whenever I got a chance and tried to force urine out because I was so afraid of having an accident later. I ended up in therapy and seeing a urologist at the age of 10. Eventually, I learned how to manage it, but looking back, Being told you cannot handle a bodily function is wild. I can understand asking just so the teacher knows where you are going, but I feel like you should never be told no. Story 10. Teachers were allowed to discipline us with wooden paddles for misbehaving. We were not allowed to defend ourselves against this discipline. Story 11. Starting in kindergarten, all rulers had to be purchased from the school store. My parents thought it was a trivial money issue, but the reason was that during the previous year, parents were complaining about children coming home with bloody knuckles from the nuns striking them with wooden rulers that had a metal strip. Instead of addressing the behavior of the nuns hitting children on the knuckles with rulers, the school banned all rulers except the approved rubber rulers that did not leave marks. Story 12. No unnatural hair colors. A student showed up with very dark purple hair in 9th grade. Nobody cared, not even the principal, until an old-fashioned teacher complained. The student was sent home and suspended until the hair was dyed a normal color. Story 13. Levi's denim jackets were suddenly banned. This was the height of the mid-1980s when everyone had to have one. The reason? We moved to a brand new school, and the principal was upset that the white walls of the stairwells were getting scuffed. He blamed the buttons on our Levi's jackets and banned them. Parents were very angry and threatened the school board to get the principal fired. Story 14. In middle school, we were not allowed to wear Billabong merchandise because it contained the word bong. Looking back, I am amazed at how strict and unreasonable the school administrators were. Story 15. My old high school banned hugging because it was considered too sexual. I wish I were making that up. It was not even a particularly conservative school. Story 16. You had to eat 2 of the 3 items on your lunch tray and half your milk before you could leave for recess. You had to raise your hand for a teacher to come over and confirm. Story 17. My 1950s Northern New Jersey public elementary school had one entrance for boys and another for girls. We were required to fold our hands and bow our heads for the morning prayer. Story 18. Zero tolerance bullying policy. Both the aggressor and the victim receive the same consequences because that happens in real life. Story 19. We had a designated area called the cage, which was a fenced-in area right outside the cafeteria doors where students had to go if they wanted to smoke. It was a different time. Story 20. We had a values camp for every 8th grader. In the cafeteria, if you were caught with your elbows on the table, everyone sang a song to humiliate you, and then you had to run a lap around the very large building in the Florida heat. Story 21. We had 10 to 15 minutes to eat lunch, and then we would be sent out for recess. I could not eat that fast when I was little. My mother was a slow eater too, so that was how mealtimes were at home, at least an hour, which apparently is healthier. I used to get detention because I had not finished my lunch by the time the bell rang to go outside. So I learned to eat fast and finish everything, and I think it is a factor in my current weight problems. Story 22. 6th graders and only 6th graders were not permitted to draw in school outside of assigned art projects. It did not matter if it was a free period. We could play card games, read, or talk but could not draw. I have heard some reasonable reasons why administrators might be worried about students drawing gang signs or inappropriate images, but never a convincing explanation for why this rule did not apply to 5th or 7th graders. I assume that the 6th grade art teacher was just exerting unnecessary authority. Story 23. I have always disliked dress codes because they often restrict what girls wear and rarely affect boys. Story 24. Asking about dinosaurs got you literally pulled out of class into the hall, desk and all. Yes, I went to an unhinged religious school. Story 25. In the 1980s, boys wore very short running shorts, barely covering the buttocks. At my school, girls were not allowed to wear skirts shorter than mid-thigh. A protest was organized where girls wore boys' shorts for a day, and boys wore miniskirts. The rule was changed. More recently, schools have changed the rule about hats. Students are now allowed to wear ball caps in school. Previously, not allowing this seemed unreasonable. Story 26. When I was in 8th grade, I moved across the country from a rather large middle school campus that was in a remote area to a standard middle school in the suburbs. 6th graders were overstuffing their backpacks and developing back problems. Enough parents complained that the school actually banned backpacks after the fall semester. You could bring a backpack to school but had to leave it in your locker after arriving and could not get it until after school. Also, students were not allowed to access their lockers until lunch, so they had to carry all their belongings in their hands all day. A group of girls started carrying purses as a result, but then the school began classifying them as backpacks if they were over a certain size. I was relieved to leave after the new semester was over. By the time my sister started attending that school several years later, the principal was gone and backpacks were reinstated. Story 27. They locked every boy's bathroom except one in my high school when I was a child. Vaping was a significant issue inside the washrooms. Cameras were placed outside the doors to monitor who and when the boys used the bathroom. They claimed there was a special system to detect vape smoke in the bathroom, but I highly doubted it. Basically, an entire high school worth of boys only had one washroom in the entire building. It still feels extremely wrong to this day. I do not think children should be recorded entering a washroom. Story 28. I am still learning how to drink enough water at 29 years old. We had about 3 minutes between classes. Not enough time to go and use the bathroom. We also had 3 tardies per class per semester. If you were called to the office, had to go to the nurse, use the bathroom, or leave class for any reason, it counted as a tardy. 3 times per semester. So, I just did not drink water and never used the bathroom. Story 29. The rule was always black shoes that were not trainers. Then, in the last year, they decided that a bunch of specific brands no longer counted. Suddenly, if you had one of those brands, you would not be allowed to sit your general certificate of secondary education examinations. It took the parents complaining for them to change their mind. Story 30. Not being allowed to drink in class, including water, and teachers who say, "The bell doesn't dismiss you. I dismiss you at the end of class. I have another class to get to. The bell absolutely dismisses me from your class." Story 31. You had to do extracurricular activities. At one stage, I was at school 4 nights a week for practice and then playing sport on Saturdays. I got so burnt out. Story 32. We had a no backpacks rule for a couple of months in high school. The rule did not last long. The vice principal was not reasonable. It turns out it is not physically possible to run from one end of the building to the other, open a locker, switch out books needed for the next period, and run back during the short break between sessions. When you have 1,500 students doing that at once, there is routinely massive chaos in the hallways, and some students are up to 10 to 15 minutes late because their assigned locker might not even be in the same building as their classes that day. A few friends and I bought hunting vests with large pockets on the back and bypassed the problem entirely. The vice principal could not say anything because it did not violate the dress code and was clearly a clothing item, not a backpack. The rule started because the vice principal tripped on a backpack left poking out from under a desk and felt very embarrassed about it. Story 33. Asking for permission to go to the bathroom. Because of this, I find myself now, a fully grown adult doctor, occasionally asking my senior hospital consultant for permission to use the bathroom. Story 34. For my 2nd grade year, we lived in a semi-rural area. The school bus picked up elementary, middle school, and high school students on a single run, and it was 45 minutes to school. The elementary students had to sit 4 to a seat because we were small. No noise of any kind was permitted. No talking, whispering, laughing, or anything else. We had to sit in complete silence. Violators were removed from the bus for a week, and their parents had to drive them to and from school. Story 35. Girls were allowed to wear scarves, but boys were not. However, this rule was rarely enforced according to the high school student handbook. Story 36. You had to yell menstruation in front of the whole gym class to let everyone know you were on your period on swimming days. Story 37. No calculators in class. The teacher said that in the real world, we will not always have a calculator in our pocket. Story 38. I remember we were not allowed to wear knee-high socks in the summer with our 2 pleated skirts. I suppose it looked a bit too much like inappropriate boots. Anyway, my problem with it was that I was always held up as the prime example to be emulated because I followed the uniform rules by wearing ankle-length socks. Story 39. At lunch, you had to pull open a bag of chips. If you popped open a bag of chips, you would be suspended from lunch for 3 days. Story 40. No more than 5 students per table in the elementary school lunchroom. The tables were hexagonal with 6 sides. Story 41. No students were allowed inside until the morning bell rang. Then the teachers would open the doors to the main hall and we would flood in. The troubling part was that no students were allowed inside regardless of the weather. We had a week in winter with temperatures of 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and some kids developed the first stages of frostbite. Story 42. Could not wear white shirts on Wednesday or it could mean suspension. The racist kids started White Power Wednesday, flew Confederate flags, and openly used the N-word with a hard R. The South will rise again in Connecticut. Offensive individuals and their parents as well. Story 43. 1960s and 1970s Cleveland. No shorts were allowed for boys or girls, but girls could wear skirts. In middle school, a boy was jealous because I was talking to a girl he liked. He jumped on me in homeroom. We rolled around on the ground, throwing weak punches at each other. I was suspended because of the no-tolerance fighting rule. My mom was angry with the school. My dad asked if I had started the fight. I said no. He told me to enjoy the time off. Story 44. Not a school rule, but I had a teacher who would send you out of a lesson if you did not have equipment or a backup. For example, if your pen ran out of ink and you asked if she had a spare, she would ask where your spare was, and if you did not have one, it was off to detention for the rest of the period. Story 45. No backpacks or bags of any kind are allowed, and there are no lockers for students to store belongings. Students and parents alike felt this policy was unreasonable even before enrolling at the school, so hindsight is unnecessary. Story 46. There was one year when my elementary school got really frustrated with how noisy kids could be at lunch. They decided that kids had to sit with their classmates at lunch, not their friends. Each classroom was given 2 tables and you had to sit there. You could only be excused from the table if you raised your hand, waited for a lunch attendant to speak to you, and they felt it was justified. There were only 2 attendants, and it would take several minutes for them to get around to you. Need to go to the bathroom? You had to wait while a lunch attendant told a kid he couldn't be excused to the playground until he ate more of his vegetables. Sometimes they made you wait to go to the bathroom if they felt there were too many kids going at once. If they didn't feel like you ate enough food, you couldn't go to recess. If you talked back, you couldn't go to recess. If you were deemed too loud while eating, you couldn't go to lunch. It didn't last very long. I hope they realized they weren't really helping us developmentally, just making more work for themselves. We still had to eat enough of all the foods on our plate, and you still needed permission to go to recess, but the rest fell away after a few months. Story 47. You had to take a shower after physical education, and the teacher would stand there making sure you did. Also, you had to ask for permission to go to the bathroom and could be refused. Teachers handed out punishments for being 10 seconds late to class, even when you were running from one side of the school to the other while trying to grab the relevant book from your locker. So many unnecessary rules. Story 48. It was not a school rule, more like one teacher's power trip. We were not allowed to talk to her unless it was an emergency, and she would never let you go to the bathroom. This was in elementary school, where you only had one teacher for the entire day. One day, I really had to go to the bathroom. She, of course, said no. I asked a couple of times, but still no. Being vindictive, I decided that if I could not go to the bathroom, here was good enough. So I wet my pants and made a large puddle. As a result, I was sent home early. She was reprimanded and was forced to get rid of those rules and do her job. Story 49. I had a teacher try to enforce the no hats rule on me when I was working on a theater set and wearing a hard hat, which was strictly required by safety rules for that space. My shop teacher told her to leave me alone. Story 50. I remember one of the teachers tried to look for it, and that was the reason why you needed to be excused to the bathroom during lessons. Supposedly, it was to reduce the chances of a fight, but really it was a pain for anyone who had a legitimate excuse they preferred to keep private. Nobody wants to know if Johnny over there has type 1 diabetes and uses insulin. The only ones allowed access to those were the nurse's office and the principal's office. the latter because they have to make accommodations for students with disabilities, which makes sense. Thankfully, many teachers, mostly physical education teachers, just ignore this rule and, like kids, go with a pass. Given the subject matter, many physical education teachers have seen worse and don't bother asking why you need to go to the bathroom. It also helps that the gym was one of the few places with its own bathrooms. There were even shower rooms, although they were not used when I was there. However, when I needed to be excused to change a sanitary napkin during English class because I got my period, I didn't want to tell anyone in the class why I needed to leave since most of the class were boys. I don't think I need to explain how teenage boys were in the early 2000s. Story 51. My high school had a designated smoking area that was strictly monitored. If you stepped outside the marked area, you could get detention. Note that it was an outside space and away from general areas. I did not smoke but had a friend who served detention more than once for being literally over the line with a cigarette in his hand. There was no logic to it other than to keep people confined. Story 52. Unfortunately, I was homeschooled but now in college. Just imagine what it was like at a private fundamentalist school that used to forbid interracial dating. Literally everything was regulated, from dress codes, mostly for girls, to not even allowing platonic opposite-sex contact, to no headphones, and so on. Story 53. Girls in my school were subject to the fingertip rule, where our skirts had to fall below our fingertips when our arms were held against our bodies. There was extensive policing of female bodies. Story 54. In gym class, white socks were required. Why? They didn't have any good answer. One teacher suggested it might have something to do with dyes, but I did not believe that. By the time I got to high school, I refused to attend gym class. I am not sorry. They can change their emphasis on team sports. Story 55. I went to a really lousy school in Winnipeg. Everything was lousy, but one policy was particularly boneheaded. Lunchtime was an hour, but the lunchroom was only open for half an hour. Once that time was up, we were not allowed to stay in the school anywhere unless we had a sick note. So in minus 37 degrees Celsius weather, we had to put on all our winter clothing, go outside for 20 to 25 minutes, then come back in and take it all off again. Story 56. Middle school classes were 50 minutes long with no bathroom breaks during the first or last 15 minutes of class. Considering my school had 3 floors plus trailers for some teachers, that was easily unattainable for pubescent girls with irregular periods. Story 57. I don't know if this counts as a rule or not, but we had to use our school lunch code to order lunch. Instead of issuing random numbers, they gave us the last 6 digits of our social security number as our lunch code. I was the only one who recognized this because my mother had taught me to memorize my entire social security number by the time I was in kindergarten. Of course, no one took the concerns of a 6-year-old seriously. What do you think happened? Kids shared their lunch codes with others to get food on their accounts, such as pizza from a la carte, which you couldn't have if you were on free or reduced lunches. This went on across the whole school. Elementary school kids had high school kids' social security numbers, middle schoolers had elementary school kids' social security numbers, and so on. This continued for years. Some people still haven't made the connection. I was on Facebook a few weeks ago, and someone asked if people remembered their school lunch codes. I had to tell people from my school to stop posting theirs because they were the last 6 digits of their social security number. Once they realized this, they agreed I was right. This was the worst thing the school has ever done. Story 58. My son got in trouble in the 1st grade for drawing a gang sign. It was the cool S. Story 59. I hope this is allowed. It is not actually a rule, but this thread reminded me of it. My school was small and rural, and we did not have after-school or weekend detention. Our punishments were going to the principal's office, losing a privilege such as sitting in the office during lunch or recess, doing homework in the library during free time, or in-school suspension before progressing to full suspension. One of our principals decided that we needed to start after-school detention but insisted on calling it after-school suspension. Since we called in-school suspension by its acronym ISS, he wanted after-school suspension to be referred to by the acronym ASS. He was so firm on the name that when the inevitable happened, he completely scrapped the idea, and we never had after-school detention or ASS. Story 60. If someone walks up to you and punches you in the face, both of you get suspended for fighting, even if you did not start it or respond in any way except to bleed. Story 61. When I was in 4th grade, around 1990, my best friend and I were in an argument. I stole her coat and hid it in the cubby room at the back of the classroom, then went home. The next day, I was called into the principal's office, where he proceeded to discipline me with a strap 5 times. There was no discussion and no other adult in the room. He told me it was the first time they had used it in 5 years. This was over a hidden coat. In the past 5 years, no one had done anything worse than hide a coat during springtime. I told my dad, and it did not go well for the principal. I would say that was a little unhinged. Story 62. Girls are being dress-coded for wearing sleeveless tops or tank tops, while boys are allowed to wear them. It is considered acceptable to remove girls from class and disrupt their learning, but a boy being distracted by a glimpse of a shoulder is not tolerated. Story 63. No holes in your jeans. I fell at recess and scraped my knees, resulting in a small tear and bleeding. The nurse gave me band-aids, and the principal gave me in-school suspension. Story 64. I got in trouble for quietly doing my geometry homework during drop everything and read time. I hardly ever did my homework, but I did read a lot. Story 65. Twice in the school year, the elementary school would organize a lunch hour dance. The rule was if someone asked you to dance, you were not allowed to say no. This created a lot of anxiety for my daughter. I told her she is always allowed to say no to someone for any reason, even if it is an adult. She said, "But I will get into trouble." I told her that parents have the final say in everything to do with their children, and I would fight her school if I had to. I am glad to say I have a teenage daughter who is not afraid to tell someone no. Remember, no is a complete sentence. Story 66. We could not wear shorts after Labor Day. Boys could not have hair that touched the collar of a shirt. Story 67. You know those leggings that used to be popular in the early 2000s? The capri-length ones with lace on the bottom that girls used to wear with jean skirts. I was always dressed pretty dowdy as a kid. Finally, I saved up enough for this outfit from Abercrombie. I was very excited. 5 minutes into class, my teacher pulled me outside and told me I had to go to the office or call my parents to bring me new clothes because the skirt was too short. I suggested I take the skirt off and just wear the leggings, but she said no. They were opaque like the ones everyone wears for workout gear now. It just seems unreasonable given today's standards and the fact that they were essentially pants. I felt really ashamed on that and several other occasions when I was told my clothing was too sexy or distracting at the age of 13 to 16. Story 68. In high school, we had to use specific doors and walk on designated sides of the halls. There were arrows on the ground indicating the direction to walk. The doors had signs showing which ones to use for entering and exiting. It sounded like a good idea, but as soon as the bell rang, no one followed the rules. People were everywhere, rushing to their lockers or crossing diagonally to get where they needed to be. This always annoyed the administration. Story 69. No shuffling your feet in the hallway on the way to class. There were even teachers enforcing this rule. In their defense, someone had the idea to carpet our middle school's hallways with very low commercial carpeting. When we all started getting static shocks from touching our lockers, we quickly realized that if we shuffled all the way to class, we could shock our friends with a large static electricity shock. Instead of allowing a group of 13-year-olds to have some harmless fun, the school decided to crack down on foot shuffling. Story 70. My dad attended an all-boys Catholic school in the 1970s. According to him, they had to take swimming in gym class and everyone had to swim naked. Story 71. No backpacks. You could take them to your locker, but they had to stay there all day. Since my locker was far from most of my classes, I had to carry 40-pound books all day. Story 72. My friend was suspended for going to school with his hair dyed bright blue because it broke a rule. So he shaved it off. When he returned, they suspended him again because there was a rule saying hair could not be shorter than 1/4 inch. He was a varsity letterman and got into West Point with a letter from the senator. It was not like they were punishing a bad student. Story 73. I went to a public elementary school in Texas that required the following. Boys to wear their shirts tucked in with a belt. Boys' hair had to be short enough that it would not touch their ears. Shorts had to reach the top of the knee for both genders. You had to address every teacher as sir or ma'am, or you could get detention. You had to ask to go to the restroom and not the bathroom because there was nowhere to bathe yourself. Lastly, corporal punishment was not acceptable. This was the mid-1990s, by the way. Story 74. We could not grow our hair past our collars at the all-boys Catholic school because it was considered distracting. Meanwhile, I had to sit next to dozens of sports players spitting in cups all day to make weight for wrestling. Apparently, that was not considered distracting. Story 75. Grade school. I wanted to wear no-show ankle socks with my cool new sneakers. I did not like how normal ankle socks or quarter socks looked. This was not a problem when it was cold and I had to wear pants. However, on the first day I wore shorts when the weather was nice. I was sent to the principal's office for violating the dress code. There was absolutely no rule about sock length in our handbook. Sadly, the next year the handbook included language stating that socks had to be visible above the shoe line. Story 76. Could not get up from our seats during lunch except to return your tray and throw out trash. We had to promptly return to our seats. No visiting other tables, no standing, no moving chairs to another table. I thought it was a silly rule back then, and I still think it is silly now. Story 77. My college had a no cats or dogs in the dorms rule. You could have any other pet. One of my dorm mates had 2 parrots. There were ferrets, chinchillas, rats, snakes, and more. Freshman year, you had no choice of roommates, so you might be stuck living in a small room with a very obnoxious bird or a stinking weasel. Story 78. No spaghetti straps for girls. I kind of understand the shorts rule, but why are a girl's shoulders not allowed? Cannot really be about cleavage because regular t-shirts can show it depending on body type. Edited to add, yoga pants were banned for girls too, because apparently someone might see a girl's figure. Ripped jeans above the knees were also banned. Hats and hoods worn up were banned as well. Story 79. In my high school, students were not allowed to wear concert shirts. If you wore one, teachers made you wear it inside out all day. Story 80. Girls had to wear skirts. I recall several male teachers who always had the attractive girls sit in the front row. Story 81. I went to Catholic schools. It was completely normal for the nuns to hit your hands with a wooden pointer and make you stand in the corner or outright belittle you in front of the class. In high school, the boys' school, separate from the all-girls school, the Christian brothers would put on boxing gloves and duke it out with a bad boy in the ring. There was a lot of corporal punishment, which I assume is banned today. Story 82. Shorts had to be longer on your thighs than your fingertips. Some girls got to wear short shorts. Some looked like they were going on safari. Break the rule, get sent home. Story 83. In my primary school, we had the oldest students monitor who went to the toilet. You had to give your name and be signed in and out. I once tried to go twice during lunch break and was refused the second time. It seems really strange that people couldn't just access the toilets and that there were essentially toilet supervisors. Story 84. We were not allowed to wear red pants. I guess it was a gang-related rule. We always heard that at the so-called bad middle school, you could not walk in groups of more than 3, but I never found out if that was true or not. Story 85. I attended a very difficult school for the first year of junior high until my mother took me out. There was a lot of theft, fights, and vandalism. Students kept writing on bathroom walls, and the administration became frustrated. They decided to lock all the student bathrooms for the entire day and tried to make that a new policy, that there would be no bathrooms available for students. We all started using the staff bathrooms even when we were told not to. This situation lasted about a week before they unlocked the student bathrooms again without any explanation. I assume that many parents were very upset. Story 86. Boys could not wear shorts at a school that had no air conditioning. Girls could wear dresses, skirts, and skirts, which were basically baggy shorts. A few of my friends decided to wear girl skirts to circumvent the rule since girls were allowed to wear them. They were suspended for a few days. Story 87. The high school requires students to raise their hands and ask permission to use the restroom during lunch break. They are not allowed to leave the cafeteria for any reason. The only time they spend outside is during gym class or the 5-minute allowance to get to the next class. Story 88. My middle school had music playing during class periods. We were allowed to vote on the playlist, and the teachers honored our vote. This resulted in Sex on Fire being played repeatedly every single hall break for months. It was literally the only song ever played. Some students tried to organize a vote to change the playlist, but the Sex on Fire supporters won. They stopped the music time after, I believe, a fistfight broke out. Story 89-1. We could only wear solid color shirts or jackets with no visible logos because it could signal gangs. It was hard to find a jacket without any words or store branding, and most kids ended up not wearing a jacket even when there was snow on the ground. If you fell asleep in my world history class, the teacher was allowed to throw balls at you. The class took place in the dark, with the teacher speaking in a monotonous voice. Usually, at least one student was hit with a ball per day. No drinking water was allowed until after running a mile. I should have asked my mother for a doctor's note to let me have a water bottle. Instead, I ran a mile in summer heat, only drinking 6 ounces of juice at lunch. Story 90. No access to your backpack as it had to be in your locker during school hours, so you had to carry your textbooks from class to class. No water in the classrooms. Limited hall passes per semester for bathroom breaks. Lastly, you could not receive your high school diploma unless you spent the night in the gym. This was an effort to prevent parties and drunk driving. They let you out just before dawn. Story 91. We girls were made to kneel on the ground, and a ruler would be held to our shorts or skirts to ensure they were no more than 3 inches from the ground when we were kneeling. If it was too short, you could call your mother to bring you a different outfit. If she was not available, you had to wear the school skirt, which was an ugly woolen wrap skirt that went all the way to the floor. This was in the mid-1990s. It was not like it was the 1950s. Story 92. At my high school, we were not allowed to wear the hoods on our heads if we were wearing jackets or hooded sweatshirts inside the building. Story 93. My high school had separate classes for students who were mothers or pregnant, where they could bring their children to school, which was great in theory. When in-school suspension was full, they sent students to sit in the mother classes as punishment. Story 94. We were not allowed to wear hats. I was very jealous of Robin Givens' hat style on the television show Head of the Class. Story 95. We were allowed to bring hot drinks from home in the winter months. Some people had alcohol in their bottles and no one cared. Story 96. I put a pink streak in my hair over the Christmas break, and when I returned to school, I was sent home to dye it back to my natural color. If I did not, I would be suspended until I did. Story 97. Skirts had to be a certain length. I remember in high school kneeling next to my desk while the nun came around with a ruler. If it was too short, you were sent to the principal's office. You have to love Catholic school. Story 98. I'm still upset that they made it so my friend and I couldn't play Yu-Gi-Oh at school. We would play in study hall every day, but someone decided to bring in a deck of cards and play poker with his friends, including betting. When asked why he thought it was a good idea, he pointed at our table and said we were doing the same thing. No matter how much we explained that it was just a game with no gambling involved, they still told us we couldn't play. That was until the librarian, since we played in the library during lunch, spoke up for us and we were able to play again. Story 99. We were not allowed to use the bathrooms except during passing periods after students were caught smoking there. Passing periods were only a few minutes long. This caused some issues for girls during their menstrual cycles. Story 100. No shorts of any kind in Texas. Skirts had to be to the knee unless they were part of a uniform such as cheerleading, drill team, or color guard. Story 101. At my daughter's school, they have choir performances on the same night for junior high and high school students. The junior high students are not allowed to watch the high school performance and cannot leave. They have to sit in the choir room until it is over, so they spend the time playing on their devices instead. Story 102. When I was in middle school, teachers were allowed to inflict collective punishments on non-offending students, basically whenever they wanted. This is a key reason why I oppose bans on cell phones in kindergarten through 12th grade schools. If teachers consider doing that, they need to know they are always at risk of being recorded. Story 103, Zero Tolerance. You could be walking down the hall and someone trips you. Congratulations, you are expelled. There was no reason to hold back at all because you were punished for just existing. All fights became extremely ugly after that, but they gradually decreased to almost nothing. Story 104. If you were late too many times, you had to do in-school suspension. You are missing the start of your classes too often. So go sit in this room all day and miss all your classes instead. Story 105. Not the rule itself, but the unreasonable application of it. Girls' shorts, skirts, and dresses had to come to mid-thigh or lower. This is fine under ordinary circumstances, but one of my sister's friends was over 6 feet tall with long legs and played volleyball. Even shorts considered long on other girls were technically too short on her, despite being long enough to not be inappropriate by any other standard. We had a new assistant principal who tried to make a name for herself by being zero tolerance on rule breaking. She came down hard on my sister's friend for wearing shorts that technically broke the rules despite being far from indecent. To make matters worse, the assistant principal sometimes wore skirts that did not come to the middle of her thigh, which my sister's friend pointed out to her father, a member of the school board. Needless to say, the assistant principal's contract was not renewed after her first year with the district. Nobody missed her after she was gone. Story 106. Catholic grammar school 1960s boys had to wear shoes with laces. The theory was if you wore loafers, you could use the shiny part to look up girls' dresses. No lie. Story 107. We had to tuck in our shirts. Only shirts like blouses or specific dress wear were allowed to be untucked because they were meant to be worn that way. It was a demerit to be caught with your shirt untidy. 3 demerits resulted in detention. This was in a public school in Alabama in the early 1990s. Story 108. Girls could not wear tops with spaghetti straps. Tube tops were allowed, and boys could go shirtless. WWE wrestlers still wore spaghetti strap tops, but if a teacher was nearby, they removed the sleeves and tucked them in to make it look like a tube top. Shirts often fell, and teachers caught on and began checking for straps. One girl was suspended because her actual tube top had small loops for hanging on hangers. The male teacher did not believe her even though her arms did not fit through the loops. Boys began wearing spaghetti strap tops to taunt the girls. This was back in the late 1990s when boys would not even use a pink pencil or they would be labeled homosexual. Story 109. Signing a contract stating that if you are caught smoking anywhere at any time, it is grounds for immediate expulsion. In private school, this was one of the more lenient rules. Story 110. My elementary school had uniforms. With uniforms, we were told to wear white socks and black or brown shoes. They could not be gym shoes. As I got older, the rules around socks became stranger. They had to be visible and at least cover your ankle, but they could not have any visible branding because apparently seeing a Nike swoosh on someone's sock would make kids jealous. The strictness with which sock rules were enforced and new ones created every time a new trend surfaced was mind-boggling. Story 111. In elementary school in the 1980s, only kindergarten students were allowed to wear shorts. Girls could escape the heat by wearing dresses, but boys had to wear long pants even if it was sweltering. Story 112. When I was in middle school, the vice principal would get on the microphone at the end of lunch and yell, "Hands up, voices off." Then give us a lecture reminding us to throw our trash away and be quiet in the halls. On the first day, when she told us to put our hands back down, we all slammed our hands on the table, and the vice principal made us do it again. Generally, entire classes were punished for the rule breaking of a few. Story 113. 3-finger width rule for tank top straps and fingertip rule for short length. Then we switched to no shorter than 2 inches above the knee, as if companies even make those for teenagers. Story 114. 3 sips of water. No more. Stop hogging the drinking fountain. All you need is 3 sips. Today, children have water bottles on their desks. Story 115. The boys' bathroom did not have a door, nor did the toilet stalls. The sinks and mirrors were directly in front of the toilet stalls, so standing in the hallway, you had a direct reflected view of the toilets. The urinals faced the door, so you were basically urinating with your back to the public hallway. We had a kid in my class named Steve. One day, when he was done using the urinal, he turned around without putting himself away and started swinging it in a circle toward the people in the hallway. Steve was taken before the principal for exposing himself, and they said they were going to suspend him. His mother then appeared before the school board, questioning why her son was being punished for using the bathroom with no privacy. The school board unanimously agreed there should be a door on every bathroom in the school, but later found out that the door had been thrown away. They decided it was too expensive to replace it. The bathrooms still did not have doors when I graduated. Story 116. When I was in 7th grade, all the bathrooms were locked all day, every day for a week except for one because of the axe craze. We also were not allowed to have any drinks, even water, in class. My high school had the bright idea during freshman year to put everyone in the cafeteria during lunch. It had a capacity of 1,500, and we had more than 3,000 students total. It lasted a week until it was reverted back to eat wherever but be quiet. I ended up spending that entire week in the bathrooms because kids were packed like literal sardines. Story 117. In my Catholic elementary school, there was a long hallway that had statues of saints hung on the walls. It was called the Hall of Saints, and we were absolutely forbidden from talking when we were in it. Story 118. Pre-kindergarten and elementary school teachers were allowed to discipline us with their hands, a wooden ruler, or a wooden pointer stick. This occurred from pre-kindergarten to the 3rd grade for me until we moved to another city. Story 119. Saying the Pledge of Allegiance takes 2 minutes of disruption per day. At 180 school days, that is basically a full school day lost to talking to an inanimate object. Story 120. Girls were not allowed to wear skirts with hemlines above the knees. Boys were not allowed to have hair above finger height. The teachers would actually run their hands through the hair and cut any length beyond their fingers. These rules were not strictly followed, but the teachers could always enforce them at any time. Story 121. Shorts had to be a hand width above the knee. However, girls with long legs were given exceptions because someone's mother complained that they could not find any shorts long enough in the junior section, and her daughter refused to wear shorts that looked old-fashioned. Story 122. In junior high, ages 11 to 13, we had a principal who was very strict about public displays of affection. It sounds harmless enough. Kids can be inappropriate while dealing with puberty hormones. However, she was clearly homophobic and used the rule to mistreat kids who were, or were suspected of being, queer. She overlooked public displays of affection between kids of opposite sexes but had no tolerance for any closeness between kids of the same sex. One of my best friends was an openly lesbian, so I was on the watch list. I got in trouble for walking arm in arm with my female friends but tested it by hugging a male friend, which went unpunished. Once, during class when the halls were empty, I ran into a friend while coming out of the bathroom. We hugged, she saw, and we were sent to the office. The principal said, "Girls like you two shouldn't be allowed in the bathroom with other girls." It was very upsetting. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.